This is the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
Joining me now is Nir Eyal. Nir Eyal is the author of the book Indistractable, phenomenal work. And we're diving into how do you make time for what you value most? It could be a plethora of things: exercise, prayer, family time, reading, tennis, board games, hiking, even just those fun things you love to do. Nir Eyal again wrote the book Indistractable. I love the book. Distraction's a real challenge today. So without further ado, Nir's with me now. Nir, how do you have fun and make time for what you value most in your day-to-day?
Well, it's great to be back with you again, as always. And I think this is such an important topic, especially with so much happening in the news and the world, all the global conflicts, everything that we're thinking about these days. It's so hard to stay focused on what really matters to us, our family, our faith, the people who really matter to us in our lives, the good we can do in the world, ourselves. And so the most important thing to understand is the difference between distraction and its opposite. What is the opposite of distraction? Most people think the opposite of distraction is focus, right? I don't want to get distracted. I want to stay focused, but that is not exactly right. The opposite of distraction is traction. Of course it is. Traction and distraction. So what we've got to do is to be able to define what is traction for every minute of our day. And this might sound extreme to some people, but let me tell you, if you feel like you can get more out of your life, if you think you're constantly distracted by one thing or another and you're not able to do the things that you know you are able to do and want to do, it's because you haven't defined what is traction, because you can't say you got distracted unless you know what you got distracted from. So one of the best tips I can give people is to use what's called time boxing. Don't just use a to-do list, but actually sit down and look at your calendar and ask yourself, what would be traction for my day, right? What would be doing what I say I'm going to do mean for my day? And so that means making time by turning your values into time. This is a very important concept, right? Turning your values into time. What are values? Values are attributes of the person you want to become. And so we talk about values, but we don't really define them for ourselves. And so values are attributes of the person you want to become. It's not things you want. It's not things you value. It's attributes. It's who you want to be. So what kind of person do you want to become when it comes to taking care of yourself, when it comes to taking care of your family, the people you love, when it comes to your faith? Do you have that time in your calendar, or do you just say, oh, I'll get to it when I get to it? So that's one of the best pieces of advice I can give folks, is to actually make a calendar based on your values, because that's the only way to know the difference between traction and distraction.
I love it because I find that you're actually able to ask yourself that question, or I am, when I'm distracted. What am I supposed to be doing right now? Where am I supposed to be located? Who am I supposed to be with? What's that task, that big picture vision that's supposed to be happening right now?
Absolutely. And I think for most people, it's really easy to be just taken by the winds of wherever the world wants to take you, whatever's on TV, whatever's on social media, whatever the gossip is. Just do what other people are doing. And of course, that's what leads us to a life of regret. And that's really the goal here, is to minimize regret by saying in advance, here's how I want to spend my time according to my values.
So how do you prioritize with the ever-growing demand of work while making your most valued activities the higher priority?
Absolutely, yeah. So the very first step to becoming indistractable is to understand where our distractions come from. And most of us tend to blame what's called the external triggers, the pings, the dings, the rings, everything in our outside world, our boss, our kids, all of these things outside of us. And they definitely account for a good share of our distractions, absolutely. But studies find that 90% of the time that you get distracted, 90%, 90, it's not because of what's happening outside of you. It's because of what's happening inside of you. These are called internal triggers. What are internal triggers? Internal triggers are uncomfortable emotional states that we seek to escape. Boredom, loneliness, fatigue, uncertainty, anxiety. That is the source of 90% of our distractions. So what most of us do is that we blame the things outside of us, right? We blame our boss, we blame our work, we blame our kids, we blame the news, we blame all the stuff outside of us, and that only accounts for 10% of the reason we get distracted. So even though those do play a role, the much more important first step is to ask yourself, what emotion am I trying to escape with this distraction? Because whether it's too much news, too much booze, too much football, too much Facebook, it doesn't matter what the distraction is. If you don't understand the underlying reason you're getting distracted, it's not because you have a moral failing or you have a broken brain. It's simply that you haven't learned the skill of dealing with discomfort in a healthy way that leads you towards traction rather than distraction. So the very first step is to get really clear about the emotion you are escaping. And so sometimes it is, of course, these external factors, the pings, the dings, the rings, but most of the time it's your feeling about the situation. It's not an objective reality. It's a subjective perception of, this feels boring, or, I feel stressed, or I feel uncertain, or I feel lonely. That's the very first step, to really understand what's the root cause of why you're looking to escape the situation with a distraction.
So it sounds like it's not that you're chasing after the ding, the ping, whether it's picking up Instagram, TikTok, an email, whatever it might be. It's the why as to why you're shifting from this specific task to that distraction. Does that sound right?
Absolutely. Right now, there are, of course, emergencies. There are,
Right.
very things that come up that really do need your attention. It's pretty darn rare. Most of the time, it's our worrying that an emergency might happen.
Yes.
And so we don't actually start focusing.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I know a lot of people are horrified when I say I completely turn my phone on airplane mode at night. Like when I'm done for the day and until I'm ready later in the morning, I turn it off, because they're just, my immediate family is right here. And yes, there are other things in the world that could absolutely happen. But at the end of the day, when you're supposed to be sleeping, you're supposed to be sleeping. And there's not a whole lot I can do when I'm sleeping to help fix and change things, especially as a mom with young children at home. I'm not going to be running off to help someone in a particular situation, is the reality of it. But I bring that up because, for some people, they say, okay, my phone's a distraction, or all these things, but you're saying it's an emotion that you're trying to avoid. So you mentioned, for example, boredom and exhaustion as two emotions that are stirring for a lot of people when they run down the rabbit hole of the distraction. Can you give maybe an example of a scenario that you've worked with, and then how you came to that, what that emotional response was? Because I know you've worked with a lot of people on coaching on this.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And this is, again, the vast majority of the problem. I mean, your example was perfect, where you might feel like you can't turn your phone to airplane mode when you're sleeping or when you're working, right? To turn off notifications while someone's working and wants to do focused work. How could they do that? Well, what if somebody needs me? But you see, it's not reality. It's your brain tricking you into thinking that there's a problem, because there might be a situation, right? So it's not an objective fact. It's your perception of that reality. I mean, your case in point is perfect. What did people do before phones, right? They got a good night's sleep, and they waited until the morning to figure out if there was anything that needed their attention. And so what a lot of people do is that they sacrifice their present health and sanity and well-being at the expense of all these fears. What if someone might need me? Well, if there's an emergency, someone's going to find you. They're going to get to you. But we sacrifice every single day of our lives with all this tension and stress, leaving our phones on all the time when we're with our family, when we're having a meal, when we're sleeping, even, as you mentioned.
It's interesting you mentioned the what if, because the what if kind of reminds me of almost a bit of a savior complex. Like I can only be okay if I'm like making sure I'm available for everyone else to make sure that everything's okay. That could be from a trauma. It just, when you were mentioning that, there could be a lot of emotional drives behind that what if that is forcing me to be ready and available at all times, almost in this like perpetual fight or flight mode.
Yes, absolutely. And you asked for a case study. I'll give you a very clear example of this phenomenon. I worked with an executive who complained to his boss, to the CEO, that, look, I can't get anything done because people are constantly needing things from me. I'm constantly getting emails and requests and taps on the shoulders and urgent SMS texts. I cannot get any work done because people constantly interrupt me. And so the CEO had read my book, and he suggested, look, here's what we're going to do. We're going to hire you an executive assistant, and she's going to check all of your emails and text messages, and nobody can get to you unless they go through her first for the entire week. And we're going to see, we're going to filter this problem to see where these requests are coming from. Fantastic. Wonderful. And that's what they did. And on day one, the executive went to his secretary and said, okay, well, how many messages came through today? Well, nothing, sir. There was nothing actually that urgent that I need to interrupt you. Right? There's a lot of things that came in, but none of them warranted interruption. Oh, okay. Well, maybe today was a fluke. Day 2 went by. No urgent requests, no interruptions. So it goes to the secretary. What happened? Where are all the urgent interruptions? Well, there are all lots of requests, but again, nothing needed your interruption. So what he was doing, this happened for the entire week, and it turned out that it was all in his head, that he was worried that someone might need him. So he kept checking email. He kept checking his phone just because he thought someone might. And of course, every time he checked, there was a message waiting for him that he perceived was urgent, but really nothing that couldn't wait 30 minutes, an hour until he could finish his more important work and focus on that task without distraction.
Wow, it's fascinating. So I think the question is, did he keep the assistant, and what did he do during the week when he suddenly didn't have all those distractions?
Well, once he learned these skills, and he learned that actually the distractions were starting in his own head. It was his fear that someone might need him, not the reality that someone needed him urgently. It was the fear. And again, I'm not saying that he didn't have a ton of emails. He certainly did. And we took care of how we could sort through all those emails with a different chapter of my book. But the idea was that he didn't need to constantly interrupt himself and blame all these other factors.
So it's been Nir Eyal. He's the author of the book Indistractable, a great and very effective read. And frankly, if you have maybe even high school or college age kids, this is a great book as well, with fantastic lessons for exercising and practicing that key idea of staying on task. And I love it. It's something that I've used a lot in my work with especially mentoring youth, and that it's very helpful to help have that idea of that time block schedule, that's everything, knowing what you're supposed to be doing when, so that you can do what you'd like to do, whether it's prayer, exercise, family time, reading, tennis, board games, whatever it is that you enjoy or is the biggest priority at the time, and actually make it happen. Again, check out Nir's work, nirandfar.com.
Like what you just heard? Share it with your family and friends. And thanks for listening.